Hey folks, you know what another name for a trade deficit is? A capital surplus. Thank goodness for Kevin McCarthy! Isn't something one says every day. But in the matter of President-elect Donald Trump's backward and destructive plan to resurrect 19th century tariffs, i.e. border taxes imposed upon American consumers, the gentleman from California is invaluable. Trump wants to impose 35% tariffs on everybody. All Americans would be paying them. He does not seem quite sure just how indiscriminate he wants to be. One of the reasons for that is that Trump has the question of trade deficits mixed up in his head with the question of offshoring, and like most Americans, he does not understand either of them very well. The president-elect, writing on Facebook, because that's what presidents-elect do now, insisted, quote, "Any business that leaves our country for another country, fires its employees, builds a new factory or plant in the other country, and then thinks it will sell its product back into the U.S. without retribution or consequence is wrong!" Eccentric punctuation and capitalization, the Trumps. It's literal reproduction. "There will be a tax on our soon-to-be strong border of 35% for these companies wanting to sell their products, cars, AC units, etc. back across the border." Pretty tough talk for a guy who just oversaw a multi-million-dollar corporate welfare giveaway to Carrier as his first semi-official act. It's not clear that the federal government even has the power to do what Trump proposes, to pay or lay on a punitive tax based on offshoring decisions as opposed to laying on a general tariff, which would be even worse, macroeconomically speaking. But Representative McCarthy, or Majority Leader McCarthy, has made it clear that congressional Republicans are not much inclined to follow Trump down that particular rabbit hole, preferring to work on such less exotic measures as corporate tax reform that would make investing in the United States a more attractive proposition, which simply means Trump will impose these tariffs, 35% tariffs, by executive decree. You know he's going to. Of course, investing in the United States already is a very attractive proposition. And of course, it will be less so with the imposition of those tariffs, which is, almost everybody gets this wrong, the main reason we have trade deficits, aka investments or capital surpluses. You see, trade deficits are partly a question of consumer preference. American consumers really do like Hondas more than Japanese consumers like Buicks, but they are not mainly a question of consumer preference. They are mainly a question of investor preference. And investors prefer the United States. Still, it's almost a miracle after the last 8 years, which is why there is almost twice as much foreign direct investment in the United States as in Red China. Even though Red China's economy has grown at a much faster rate over the past 20 years, and they are, as they have been for the past 2 years, the largest economy in the world. You see, it works like this. Almost every advanced country does a great deal of international trade. They have lots of imports and exports because it is easier to grow sugar in Florida than it is in Norway, and more efficient to sew t-shirts in Bangladesh than it is in Switzerland. Of course, Trump will take care of all that. He'll fix them. Isn't that the goal of anti-globalists, to destroy the global economy? which they think will only hurt the Illuminati and the bankers cabal and whatever the hell else the paranoid tinfoil hat crowd talks about on the Alex Jones show. Here's a hint. It would hurt all of us way more than it would hurt them. When Walmart orders $1 million worth of flip-flops from a Chi-Com concern, those Chi-Com gentlemen receive $1 million delicious US dollars, which they are very happy and grateful to have. But what can you do with US dollars? You can buy stuff from US companies where it's way more expensive, even before Trump's tariffs. Or you can buy assets from sellers who take US dollars at a much more reasonable price, which ultimately means US-based investments. This is true even when you add in all of the real-world complications, such as foreign exchange. If you are that flip-flop entrepreneur in Red China, you probably have a very high rate of savings, which is normal for people in poor, backward, unstable countries, like the United States now is. There is lots of uncertainty in a place like Red China, just as there now is in America. And having a whole lot of savings, especially dollar-denominated assets, is a rational response to that. But it isn't only the Chi-Coms. The Japanese, the British, the Germans, and the other Europeans, the Canadians, the Mexicans, and practically everybody else in the world with a little bit of coin to invest likes to buy American assets. And why wouldn't they? The American economy is was the most wondrous thing human beings have ever managed to do, and all it takes to get yourself a piece of it is a few greenbacks. I mean, it isn't that anymore, but there's the cultural overhang and momentum and so forth. It takes a while for people to is taking a while for people to realize that the American economy is no longer that which it used to be. Now, the mystery isn't why so many foreigners want to invest in U.S. assets, but why Americans invest so little, which is a symptom of that new reality that hasn't quite penetrated craniums yet about what the American economy is now as opposed to what it used to be. Trade deficits don't happen because the wily Japanese juke us on trade policy. They happen because intelligent people holding a fistful of dollars very often decide to forego the consumption of American consumer goods in order to invest in American assets. In economic terms, what this means is that the trade deficit is a mirror image of the capital surplus. In other words, we have all of their money. A capital surplus isn't necessarily an unalloyed good. Everything in economics is about trade-offs. But it is a pretty nice thing to have around if you are, say, an entrepreneur looking to build a new facility in Houston or Jacksonville and looking for some investors to stake you. If the economists are correct and trade deficits are mainly driven by investment preferences rather than consumer preferences, what would a big Trumpoid tariff actually do? Batten down the hatches, buckle your safety belts, and put your trays in the upright and locked position, folks. Daniel Griswold of the Cato Institute considered the case back during the 1990s trade panic. You remember, you ever see Back to the Future Part 2? It depicted a situation in 2015 in which basically Japan had taken over the world, including the United States. Anyway, quote, slapping higher tariffs on imports will only deprive foreigners of the dollars they would have earned by selling in the U.S. market. This, in turn, will reduce the supply of dollars on the international currency market, raise the value of the dollar relative to other currencies, and make dollar-priced U.S. exports far more expensive for foreign buyers, thus reducing demand for our exports. You want to sell more overseas? Don't impose tariffs. Eventually, the volume of exports will fall along with imports, and the trade deficit will remain largely unchanged, but the economy will be in the waste extractor. In other words, all that protectionism protects Americans from is prosperity. All the prosperity they will be foregoing at the behest of populist national socialist demagogues like Donald Trump. Now, the trade deficit might remain unchanged, but there would be a large cost attached. Without that foreign investment capital flowing into the United States, money gets more expensive. Higher interest rates, anybody? What happens when interest rates start going up? You got a $20 trillion national debt. So the interest payments on that debt explode, and the deficit explodes, and up go taxes, and the economy is already in a downward spiral, and the whole thing, like the walls of Jericho, it'll all come tumbling down. Or more like, ah! That means that, among other things, entrepreneurs have a harder time raising capital. And having a fat tax man and starving entrepreneurs is not a model for prosperity. It is its opposite, as a matter of fact. You see, one of the problems, I suspect, is that people hear the word deficit and they think of the trade deficit as being like the budget deficit, i.e., a mounting debt that one day will have to be repaid. This is something closer to the opposite. We get more stuff in return for the stuff we sell, and we get cheap investment capital on top of it. Foreigners get access to a dynamic economy with a stable government, miraculously stable considering the jackasses in charge of it. It's not going to remain that way. And a stable currency. Everybody benefits. But of course everybody benefits. Trade does not happen between countries, which is why trade deficits are a kind of mirage anyway, a chimera of aggregation, but between buyers and sellers, each of whom stands to gain from the exchange. In other words, a free market global economy. Economy should not have borders, in other words, because that is restraint of trade. That is government intervention. That is stateism. If it were otherwise, the exchange would not happen. Simple as that. And Trump's tariffs will prevent a great deal of exchange from happening. And we're already in an economic depression. You want to make it worse? That's what Trumpoids, that's what you Trumplicans, that's what you're supporting. Making Barack Obama's artificially imposed and maintained economic depression even worse. So that's the really nifty thing about voluntary exchange, which can only happen in the absence of statism and protectionism. Pardon the redundancy. You see, someone should explain this to the president-elect, assuming it is possible to explain things to him, which, of course, it is not.